episode of Human Trafficking Hater. On this week's episode, I'm going to break down week 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. If you haven't seen my first breakdown of week 1, then you can check that out up here somewhere. I'll have that link available for you. But in this week, we really just see a continuation of what was happening in the first week. We see the prosecution bringing on witnesses. We see the defense team going after those witnesses' credibility by attacking their character and bringing up different conduct that they've had in their past to try to establish that they're not really reliable witnesses. So let's go ahead and get into it. Earlier this week, we heard from Carolyn, a pseudonym to protect her true identity. Carolyn says that she was first victimized by Epstein when she was just 14 years old. And all of the alleged victims in this case say that they were victimized by Epstein when they were either 14 or 16 years old. But for Carolyn, after she was victimized, she says that she ended up being victimized another 100 times by Epstein. Interestingly for Carolyn, that the prosecutors didn't ask her to elaborate on any of the other men that she could have been victimized by besides Epstein. They really just focused on Epstein victimizing her, and that Ghislaine was somebody who kind of groomed her for that process. So they didn't ask for any other additional people who possibly could have abused her. So some people are upset about that. They wanted to know if higher names were involved, Prince Andrew, or something along those lines. They wanted to hear some of those names. So in the past, alleged victims like Virginia Robert Guthrie, they have explicitly stated that yes, Prince Andrew was involved, and I saw these other high-ranking or high-status individuals. They were definitely involved in victimizing young girls. So in this case, they didn't press for it. And also, interesting, the prosecutors did not ask Virginia Roberts Guthrie herself to be a witness, even though her name came up quite a bit throughout this trial. So back to Carolyn, though. Carolyn was willing to share some really explicit details about what happened to her. And one of those examples was when she first started engaging in this sexual conduct with Epstein, or maybe when I guess the better way to say it is when she first observed sexual conduct with Epstein, because she was in a room with herself and Virginia Roberts Guthrie and Epstein, and Virginia Roberts Guthrie took off all of her clothes, started giving Epstein a massage, encouraged Carolyn to get down to her underwear, which she did, and then Carolyn sat there while Virginia proceeded to give Epstein a massage. Now, keep in mind, these are two underage girls giving a massage to an adult man, and then within 45 minutes, at some point, Virginia and Epstein started having sex right in front of Carolyn. Now, this was absolutely intentional on the part of Maxwell Epstein to tell Virginia to have sex with Epstein right in front of Carolyn to normalize that behavior. So I talked about the grooming process in my last video. I have another video, which I'll put that up there now. And that's all about what the grooming process is. And so that's what I'm trying to do a little bit differently in these videos, maybe than other videos that you're seeing on Ghislaine Maxwell's. I'm trying to break down some of the reality of how these things are taking place, as opposed to the sensational nature of Epstein being a millionaire and Ghislaine Maxwell being, she is a pretty heinous person, but I want to kind of bear out some of the systemic causes or reasoning behind it. So anyhow, pushing on, Carolyn saying that she had been abused 100 times by Epstein. This can sound like she was choosing to go back because she was getting money from Epstein the whole time, right? He'd give her a couple $100 every time she gave him, a massage. But she is a child. She is vulnerable. She is being exploited. He is preying on the ability that he can put a couple $100 in front of her, just like labor traffickers prey on the lack of resources and the unmet needs of individuals, including migrants and non-migrant workers that need help. And so we see the same thing here, this preying on the vulnerabilities. So just keep in mind that even if somebody's showing back up and they're getting paid for something, there still could be an underlying vulnerability that we don't identify that's being used against them. In this case, her youth is definitely one of those vulnerabilities. Also, I want to touch on this, that when we see these victims as being 14, 16 years old, this is not uncommon. I know that a lot of people in the anti-sex trafficking community talk about 12 to 14-year-olds being the average age of entry, and there are definitely some studies that support that. But if you look at the National Human Trafficking Hotline statistics, they will show that 17 is the average age of entry into commercial sex. So regardless if we're talking about 12 to 17-year-olds, the point is that we're still talking about a child. So the average age that somebody enters commercial sex in the US is 17 years old, right? That means that it's a child, and by the US federal definition of sex trafficking, that means that they are automatically a victim, because if you're under 18, you cannot consent to sex, and you can certainly not, or cannot consent to commercial sex and be held liable for that. That is going to be that you are a victim automatically. So they're victims, and if we look at the statistics further for the National Human Trafficking Hotline, we find that they are also commonly U.S. citizens. So you've got youth, right, being brought into sex trafficking, and they're commonly going to be U.S. citizens. And the reason why I mention that to you is because that is common. Not that there's anything common about a sex trafficking victim, but the things that we're seeing with these young girls who are U.S. citizens being vulnerable to adults, yes, that's definitely happened. And I should say also that it's not just young girls. There's also boys that are being trafficked as well. I think worldwide it's something like 1 out of 20 sex trafficking victims are male. So certainly in the U.S. that's definitely happening. But I just want to make sure that when we look at this case, we see that there's definitely consistency in this case with other cases around the U.S. So coming back into this trial, they really attacked Carolyn, and the defense, that is, they really attacked her character. They listed that at some point she was in possession of cocaine after her experience with Epstein, which I believe ended in 2004. So after that experience, she ended up, I should say victimization, I don't want to call it an experience, but she was in the possession of cocaine. She says that she still takes Xanax and methadone for her anxiety. They brought up that she had pawned an Xbox that wasn't hers, showing that she was willing to steal something, or maybe that she was desperate for drugs, again, attacking her character. And then they mentioned that she worked at an escort service. And when they say that she worked in an escort service, even though this is after her victimization, it still shows some sort of, lewd and, just kind of like undesirable activity. And it, again, just trying to attack her character. And I want to kind of touch on this escort thing for a second, because the Polaris, which is a large anti-trafficking nonprofit in the U.S., identified 25 separate types of human trafficking that are taking place, or 25 types of modern slavery that take place in the U.S. And of those, escort services was the #1 way that they identified people. So, out of these 25 different types of human trafficking that are taking place, and I'm using modern slavery and human trafficking interchangeably on purpose, because they're one and the same. But, whether it was labor trafficking or, people being sex trafficked in bars or whatever it is, escort services ends up being the #1 way that they're identifying victims. So the fact that she worked in an escort service after she was victimized, I don't want to say that it's not surprising, but you have to think about the fact that as a child, this person was broken and victimized. So what's their future look like? Well, without somebody stepping in some services, this is where they're going to end up. They're going to end up in other vulnerable industries where they're going to be exploited again until somebody comes in to help them out. Then we hear from another alleged victim, Annie Farmer. She's shared her case before. Hers wasn't quite as I don't know if I want to say damning on Ghislaine or Epstein, but it definitely kept out the perpetuation of Ghislaine being a groomer, saying that when she was brought into the circle of Ghislaine and Epstein, when she met them, that she was went out to the New Mexico ranch that Epstein had, his mansion, and there Ghislaine ended up unsolicited, I should say, started massaging Annie's breasts while she was laying in bed. Epstein ended up getting into bed with her and saying that he wanted to cuddle with her and kind of groping her and pressing himself up against her. And this is all taking place while she's only 16 years old. So again, 14 to 16 years old, these people are definitely being exploited and looking at those vulnerabilities, moving them to locations where it is that they will feel more isolated and inclined to go along with whatever the abuse is. And that was pretty much the case this week. So this week they brought in some additional witnesses. They continued the whole Epstein is running the sex trafficking ring. They didn't touch on the other individuals that were involved in that. They just basically made it that Epstein was the one who was the trafficker and, in a sense, the purchaser. And then Annie, the alleged victims, now totaling 4, are basically putting out there that Ghislaine was somebody who helped in this grooming process. So with the prosecution resting its case, we're just gonna have to see where this goes next week. So December 16th on Thursdays when the case picks back up again, and I will have more for you then. So make sure you click subscribe and stay tuned.